Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. The topic this time is why the legal industry is migrating to the private cloud. This webinar is hosted by the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center, and joining us today will be Joe Abraham and Vadim Vladimirskiy of ADAR IT. The Legal Technology Resource Center is an ABA member benefit provided by the ABA Law Practice Division. You can find a variety of legal technology resources on our website at lawtechnology.org or our blog lawtechnologytoday.org. Our host today is Joe Abraham, who is part of the senior leadership team at ADAR, a premium solution provider to the ABA. Joining him as our expert guest is the CEO of ADAR, Vadim Vladimirskiy. Vadim is an award-winning CEO who has been featured in Inc., Crain's, the Chicago Tribune, and Fortune magazine as an expert in the IT industry. He graduated from Northwestern University with his bachelor's in computer science and earned his MBA with distinction from the Kellogg School of Business. Thank you all for joining us, and we'll now begin the webinar.
Thank you, Rose, and welcome on, everyone. Good afternoon. This is Joe Abraham. I want to run through our agenda for our time together. Here's some of the key things we'll be covering. We'll start with a high-level overview of what the private cloud is and kind of start with the discussion of cloud itself. We'll then start to talk with Vadim a little bit about how private cloud differs or separates itself from some of the other cloud-related offerings out there in the marketplace. We'll then get into a business case for why we believe that the private cloud is probably one of the best, if not the only, legitimate solutions for law firms, and then give you some thoughts on how to evaluate the fit. It certainly isn't for every law firm out there, but what are some of the key things you should be looking for when evaluating if the private cloud's a fit for you? And then some key questions you should be asking when the time comes for you to consider the migration. What are some key questions you should ask from your partner, your future partner as your cloud provider? And then we'll just open it up for Q&A, which I'm sure Rose will moderate. So with that said, Vadim, I'm going to start by asking you to shed some light for our participants on what the cloud is. I picked this up off the web, and there's so many different definitions of the cloud, but here's just one for us to start our conversation. Basically the cloud is computing power migrated to and operating from a data center rather than a closet in my office or in our building. And then I get to access that computing power and that data from any web-connected device after I've been authenticated as a legitimate user. So with that kind of as a 40,000-foot view, take us a little bit and give us a little education on what the cloud is from there.
Yep, absolutely, Joe. Thanks for inviting me to join here. I think in a nutshell, this is a really good definition of what the cloud is. There's a lot of confusion out there as to what it is, where it is, and how it works. But ultimately, it's really about the fact that the computing power and data resides in a central location, typically called the data center. And there are lots of services that can be running out of that type of facility, accessed via the internet, and all of those services would be considered cloud-powered, right? So it would be cloud-based storage, cloud-based computing, cloud-based email, whatever the service may be. If it's in the cloud, it basically just means it's running there in the internet from a data center.
Yeah, so the big shift for our listeners today, and some have been investigating the cloud for a long time, others are just early in looking into it. The big shift is just all of our minds is gone are the days when we had robust IT infrastructures and servers in the office, on our floor, in a cool room, eating up lots and lots of energy and electricity and requiring lots of on-site monitoring, and more companies from the biggest on earth to even small businesses now are starting to say, you know what, there's a better use for our time and talent. Let's move that off somewhere where that data is safer, it runs more efficiently, and then we can be in the business of what we do. So for our listeners today who are in the legal industry, we're in the business of practicing law, not running IT, so the cloud becomes an interesting option to consider along that path. Now, when we look at cloud, there's lots of different types of cloud. Talk to us a little bit about the good side of software as a service, which is what's considered the public cloud. And you may have to educate us a little bit, Vadim, on why software as a service is typically public cloud, and then tell us a little bit about the good side of that, and then we'll talk about the bad side.
Definitely. So software as a service, I think, which was probably pioneered by Salesforce back in the late 90s, early 2000s. The concept was that instead of buying a software license or a box piece of software and then installing it on your own infrastructure in your office or in your internal corporate data center, you'd be subscribing to a service that included all of those components from a provider. Again, like Salesforce, like Microsoft Office 365, Google Apps, QuickBooks Online, any software-based solution would fall in that category. The great thing about software as a service is it eliminates the need for infrastructure, and it eliminates the need for purchasing of licenses and keeping those upgraded. And that becomes the responsibility of the service provider. They are the ones going in and installing the latest version of the software, making that available to everybody. They have usually a large customer base where they can deploy a patch or a new version to a subset of their users and make sure that it functions well before deploying it widely within their customer base. So those are some of the benefits of software as a service, which, as you mentioned, Joe, is typically an example of a public cloud where the infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, and the software is generally shared by multiple subscribers.
So let's talk about the good side of that. Certainly would be the economics, because I'm able to share the cost of all that infrastructure with hundreds, if not tens of thousands, if not millions of users. My cost per month to access a software as a service is fairly cheap. What's the not so good side of that, especially if I'm a law firm and if we're considering subscribing to lots of different types of software as a service?
So there are a number of challenges that are just inherent in the software as a service model. One being the question of data ownership and control of the data. So if you would take your, let's use Salesforce as an example. If you take your customer CRM data and you upload it into a Salesforce system, that data is technically kind of yours. It's separated from everyone else with some sort of controls. But getting that data out is very challenging. Sometimes taking it into another type of CRM product may be a challenge as well. And that is because a lot of the intelligence and a lot of the process flow and the workflows that are part of the software as a service solution are unique to that particular solution that you're subscribing to. So taking that data out will mean that all of the workflows may need to be redesigned. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is flexibility. If anybody uses a Hotmail or a Gmail account, that's an example of a SaaS public cloud service. And as you know, you get what you get, right? Everyone gets the same thing. You can do a little customization, you can make it look a little different, and you can apply various filters. But ultimately, that email system is the way it is for everybody who subscribes to it. And if you have a unique requirement where you want your data backed up in a certain location but not another location, or you want to customize the application in a way that fits your business needs better in a SaaS public cloud type of a solution, that's not a possibility.
Yeah, that makes sense. So one of the things we've looked at is, having talked to, if not dozens, hundreds of law firms and worked with so many, we kind of tried to gather up what are some of the key frustrations that law firms are facing, whether it's the practice leader or the CIO, CTO, or the director of IT. What are some of the things that are keeping them up at night as it relates to technology? And so I've just identified them here, Vadim, so that we can quickly talk through them. One of them is certainly the cost. IT just seems to have become the next big black hole. It used to be marketing. Now it seems like IT has taken over. It's just this black hole of expense related to purchasing new hardware all the time, new software, then maintaining it, and then supporting it for the user base. So that, from a capital expenditure perspective, that's something that really is a driving force for leaders in these law firms. Another one is remote access. How do we give our off-site users as close to the same, if not the same, experience as being in the office? Because as we are deployed at courts and on client sites and in hotel rooms and in planes, how do we give our users that access? Then certainly another big issue that law firms are concerned about is the whole privacy and security of confidential data. So we could talk a little bit about that. I'd like you to comment on that. And then the whole notion of disaster recovery. What if the worst were to happen and all the data that sits on our servers in our office today were to crash, or we had a catastrophic power failure, or a water main broke in our building and the building was going to be shut down for 10 days, how do we protect not just our data but our reputation as a firm? We've invested decades building the reputation. How do we protect it? So given that these seem to be the 4 recurring concerns law firms have when looking at technology, what those as it relates to the private cloud?
Sure. So, you mentioned the CapEx nature of a traditional IT system, and obviously that is the case when you have to buy physical assets and software assets and you own them and you have to maintain them. But the other component that's also a lot of organizations are struggling with is the unpredictable nature of that type of an expense. So you may invest in servers this year and use them for a year or 2 or 3, and then unexpectedly either something will fail and a new investment will need to be made, or a new software package will need to be installed and the existing environment may not be capable of supporting that software package. So the CapEx model is not only expensive up front, but it's also very often unpredictable and difficult to budget for. The remote access component, I think you were right on, that people want to be able to have the same capabilities in terms of access to their data and their applications consistently across the board, no matter where they are. They don't want to be tied down to working from just their office and having a very limited use of their system when they're traveling, as an example. And more firms we're seeing with satellite offices and multiple offices, and the challenge of where do you put that data in a way that it's not only accessible or well accessible to people within that physical location. How do you make it accessible to the other offices and people and employees who are outside of the office as well? On the privacy and security front, having data and applications stored on servers that are located inside of the office is generally much more difficult to protect against physical threats of break-ins into the office and someone actually walking off with some equipment or some computers that may have sensitive data on it, and keeping up with all the latest security threats and cyber crime activity and patches and everything. It's a full-time job just to stay on top of everything and make sure that this internal infrastructure is protected. As opposed to in the private cloud environment, the data center facility where all of this equipment and data resides undergoes continual auditing for physical security access and just consistencies of the various processes that go into that. But also the type of hardware and applications that protect the network are much more sophisticated because they service many different clients and are much more capable and stay up to date better than anything that an individual organization can do. And then finally, on the disaster recovery front, no matter where the IT infrastructure resides, it's not enough to just have a backup, and even the off-site backup is often not sufficient, because the question is, if the infrastructure were to fail, if the servers were to crash, or there was a fire, God forbid, or something that just made those servers inaccessible, even if you have the data off-site on the tape or on a hard drive, how long would it take to be able to take that data, purchase new equipment, install all the applications and software, put the data back in, and get the network up and running? Oftentimes that could be days, if not weeks, for that entire process. So the whole disaster recovery and business continuity is an important component to think about.
Yep, absolutely. And speaking of that, here's a quick case study we did just a few weeks ago with a law firm we were working on their migration with. So here's an example of what a lack of a good disaster recovery plan can cost a firm. All of you listening in represent firms of various sizes, but here's an example of 70 employees in the firm, $150K average revenue per employee, a $10 million annual revenue. And here's what it costs in 1 day of downtime, 1 hour of downtime. And so for those of you, that are technology leads in these law firms, you're a director of IT, you're a CIO, you're a CTO, you've got an interesting balance to create between what makes sense for you to be spending your time on inside the law firm. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But then, in the case of the worst case scenario, when you war game out an internal IT infrastructure and something going wrong, how much is it actually going to cost the firm beyond just more servers and uptime? It's the overall cost, not just in billable time, but in reputation, is the part that's really hard to define. But that's where it can become fairly insurmountable. And we've heard and talked to law firms that had a data breach or had a loss of data for 4, 5, 6, 7 days. And when those phone calls come in from clients going, "Where's my stuff? Where's my documents? Should I be concerned?" It's when the partners and the associates have to answer those questions, when the CIO or the CTO's job becomes a whole lot harder. So this is an interesting part of the conversation that law firms need to have, is beyond just a hard cost. What's the cost to our reputation if something fails internally with the infrastructure we have? So, Vadim, talk a little bit about this. You shared this with me about a week ago. This came out of some Gartner research, because one of the big questions IT leaders tend to have when they're looking at the private cloud is, well, if we were to migrate to the private cloud, how does that impact my role in the business and the role of my staff that historically have been doing some firefighting and fixing stuff? What do I do with them? And how do I focus my energy? Talk a little bit about this research.
So this would be, the top 10 priorities that they are projecting are, fall under the role of the IT leader in the organization. As you can see, the whole cloud computing and virtualization, those are kind of number 3, number 8, IT management is 6. So number 1 and number 2 really has nothing to do with IT per se. It really has to do with leveraging technology and information for some sort of a greater business benefit. And that's really where the biggest bang for the buck for the IT leader to spend their time is to understand, what can be done with our existing technologies, or what technologies that we need to have in place in order to make better decisions for the business. And anything that I think goes beyond, below the number 3 and 4 line, it really becomes a drain on their time that may not be things that are as valuable for the IT leader to be spending their time on. And that's where I think that a lot of the cloud technologies and private cloud especially can come in to alleviate a lot of the daily firefighting and, we call it like the plumbing of the system. All of that just needs to work, and it needs to not occupy the IT leaders' time and focus, so they can focus on the business and the analytics, the business intelligence, making employees more efficient with mobile technologies, etc.
Yeah, makes sense. So just a couple slides ago, Vadim, I brought up some of the main issues that keep law firms up at night, so to speak, at least as it relates to IT, right? The cost, that CapEx issue, remote access for staff when they're away, privacy and security, and certainly disaster recovery and reputation protection. Let's talk about how the private cloud specifically solves those problems. Just take us through.
Sure. So let me take a minute just maybe to define or position the private cloud relative to SaaS and public cloud that we spoke about a few minutes ago. So private cloud, the easiest way to think about it is it's a custom-built IT infrastructure and environment that resides in a data center that is designed and built for one specific organization. So the outcome of that will be that it's much more flexible, and it can accommodate the unique requirements, the unique workflows, and the special software that any one particular organization or law firm in this case may have. In contrast to a public cloud or a software as a service provider, where, as we mentioned, the flexibility is typically not there, you kind of have to fit within that software package, as opposed to having the cloud or having the IT system fit your existing business practices and processes. So with sort of that definition in mind, the private cloud, the equipment that goes into designing and building this private cloud is owned and managed and is the responsibility of the service provider. And what that allows you to do is to eliminate the CapEx component of a typical IT system, because instead of buying these servers and having them in the office or in the corporate data center, they're being leased, rented, whatever, however you want to look at it, but they're the responsibility of the service provider who is providing the private cloud, and it's their responsibility. Upgrades of that equipment, upgrades of all of the software that runs that infrastructure are the responsibility of the service provider. And that leads to a predictable monthly investment that can easily be budgeted for. And usually it's a function of number of seats, number of users. It's more of a consumption type model, where knowing how many employees a law firm is projecting to have in the next year, 2, 3 years, it's really easy to budget for what the IT spend is going to be without having to worry about incidental server crashes and having to invest a lot in CapEx. The 24/7 nature of the IT support that should accompany a private cloud solution is very important, because IT staff is generally overworked as they are, and that usually there aren't enough resources to service the users as is, but especially when you're talking about nights and weekends when a lot of attorneys like, to get on the system and do a lot of their work, support needs to be available and help desk needs to be available during those times. And we spoke about this remote access capability. The key with remote access, there are lots of remote access solutions out there, things like GoPC and GoToMyPC and LogMeIn and remote desktop services, terminal services, various remote access solutions. The challenge with many of them is that the experience a user has while working remotely is not quite the same. In many cases, it's a lot worse than if they're working in the office. It's not always the same desktop. It's not always the same set of applications. It doesn't usually work as fast as it does when you're in the office. And a private cloud, one of the objectives that it needs to provide is giving the users the same desktop experience when they're working from their home or from the road as they have when they're in the office. And then reputation protection, as we mentioned earlier, in the context of business continuity and disaster recovery, in case there is a failure, hardware failure, software failure, malicious data corruption, or accidental one, there's got to be a plan in place that can get the environment back up and running quickly, within hours as opposed to within days or weeks, in order to protect the reputation of the organization.
Yeah, and I'm going to take us one step back, Vadim, because it would be great especially for some of our participants who are really considering or learning about private cloud for the first time. I want them to almost picture in their mind's eye sitting in front of their desktop computer at the office, and you're looking at your Windows desktop, and you've got your start menu, and you've got your programs, and some of those programs are ones that all of us use all over the world, like Microsoft Word. And then other programs could be very specific to your law firm or very specific to the legal industry. And so those are loaded on the desktop or feeding off of an in-house server. So take that exact experience, but instead of having to access that data from a server 10 feet away in your server room, you're accessing the exact same experience from your data center, from your private cloud in the data center. The benefit of that is when you're sitting in your office, it's the exact same experience, but in the event that the office is shut down because there's a power failure or a water main broke, and for no fault of your firm's, you can't be in the office, you can go down to the local Starbucks, fire up your iPad, and access the exact same desktop experience, the same start menu, the exact same programs, the exact same user experience. Your desktop, in a sense, went with you wherever you went. You can access it on your mobile device, and it looks like a desktop computer because it is your desktop computer, because it's no longer feeding out of a physical desktop in your office. It's feeding out of a data center. And for me, when I saw that in real life, when I got to see the demonstration of a private cloud in action, it was mind-blowing to realize that I could literally be anywhere in the world. I could be at a courthouse, I could be at a coffee shop across from the courthouse, I could be at a client's boardroom and have my complete computer experience with me, not just a VPN tunnel where I can access certain files, my entire desktop experience, that's pretty powerful, and the productivity side of that is significant. So for those of us, and for those of you listening who haven't had a chance to see a private cloud demonstrated, I wanted to give you that visual, and then certainly we'd invite you to go through a demo, whether it's here in Chicago where we are, or remotely, to just see this. And once you see it in action, you almost find yourself saying, where was this thing 20 years ago, and how fast can we, if we can get access to it now? Vadim, the next question I wanted you to talk our participants through really quickly is, the private cloud sounds great, and it really is a powerful resource for a lot of law firms, but it's not for every law firm. What are some things a law firm would have to deal with where the private cloud may not be a good fit, at least right now, for them?
You know, internet connectivity becomes a key component for everyday usage of the system, right? So now, instead of having the servers being local and accessing them over the local network, and then having to go to the internet for things like email and web browsing and various web-based applications, the entire experience now has to be channeled through that internet connection. So it's important that the internet connection that's in place is fast and is reliable, and it's also best practice to have a redundant connection in place, where the system is set up in such a way where if the primary connection were to go down, the secondary could take over. So if someone doesn't have access to the necessary internet infrastructure, which nowadays that's becoming more and more rare, that broadband and high-speed reliable connections are not available, that would certainly be a situation where the private cloud would not be a great fit. It also depends on software packages. It's not so much a challenge in the legal industry. Everything kind of tends to run on Windows-based platforms. Occasionally there's Linux-based applications which work great in the private cloud. But in some scenarios where you have older like IBM or AS400 or Unix-type applications, those may not be good candidates for running in the private cloud. But that's, again, that just like internet connectivity becoming more and more ubiquitous nowadays, the same thing with software. It's generally all Intel-based Windows/Linux type software, which does run 100% well from a private cloud environment. On the support side, the private cloud can really be structured in a way where the support may be provided by the internal team that may be in the law firm already, providing desktop support and support for things like voice over IP, phones, helping with the document management system or the various other applications, and they may be the first point of contact. Or the private cloud provider could be that help desk arm of the organization, and they could be the ones who are managing all the other vendors that may be involved in delivering the IT solution, including the internet service providers as an example.
Yeah. So sometimes the size of the firm matters, because if you're a 3 or 4 or 5-man firm, the economics may not work out quite to your favor, because you probably don't have a very large IT infrastructure. So the justification to move to the private cloud may not be as compelling as if you're a firm with 10 or 15 or 20 or more, 200 users. The more users, the more compelling the argument becomes from a financial perspective, and even from a time-saving and strategic perspective for the private cloud. Let's talk really quickly as we wind down, Vadim, before we move to Q&A. Talk a little bit about some of the questions our listeners need to be thinking about or asking as they start to look at who would be the right cloud provider for us when it comes to the private cloud.
Many IT companies nowadays are really dipping their toes in the whole cloud IT services arena right now, and it's really important to understand that there's a set of expertise that differs in building, maintaining, and supporting private cloud systems versus doing traditional IT systems. So it's really important to look for a partner that has a good track record of experience providing specifically cloud-based remote IT type solutions, as opposed to traditional on-premise solutions. it's also really important that they have industry experience, that they understand, the various document management systems and other software packages that the law firm may be using that can pose some challenges in terms of integration, right? Because each private cloud implementation is unique to the organization. It's unique to that particular law firm. It's really important that the partner has experience in doing these migrations and making sure that it's a very seamless experience without introducing any downtime. Joe, a couple of slides ago, you showed us an analysis of what a day of downtime can cause a law firm of 70 people. That goes, that same number can apply to, well, what does the migration process look like? How many hours of downtime is my firm going to need to have as a result of moving over? And is that, if the migration process is not smooth, if the migration process hasn't been vetted time and time again, that's a big risk. I mean, that can have significant financial ramifications. So industry experience and experience in doing migrations is really key for any cloud partner that you may be talking to. And then ultimately, instead of, in this day and age, it's the right thing to manage these relationships to SLAs, which stands for service level agreements, where the provider comes and says, we are going to guarantee certain levels of performance. We're going to guarantee certain level of uptime. We're going to guarantee backup with a certain frequency. We're going to guarantee that if there is a question or a problem, it will be responded to within a certain number of minutes. And those are the important metrics. It's not really that important to know how many servers are running in the background or how many gigs of RAM are in place. Those are all sort of the details. What's important from the business level is what are the service level guarantees that the provider will put forth, and are those sufficient to meet the business requirements of the organization?
Absolutely. Three more quick ones that are, again, very important questions to be asking or considering, especially as a law firm getting ready to migrate to the private cloud.
Yeah, so ownership of data as compared to a SaaS or public cloud situation. In a private cloud, the vendor should really allow you to continue owning the data, but the most important question is, how do you get out? What's the exit strategy from the relationship? What type of technology are they using to store this data? And if you ever needed to take it back, would it be in some proprietary format, or would it be in an industry standard format that could easily be ported either to an in-house system or to another provider? And this ties into the vendor lock-in bullet point as well, where you want to be in a relationship where if you wanted to exit from that relationship, there would be a clear path that's defined up front of what that process would look like, and not be held hostage, so to speak, by the provider.
Sounds great. Quick snapshot for those of you that are listening about ADAR. As you know, Vadim is our CEO, but just so you know a little bit about the company, and then I'm going to hand it back over to Rose to see if there's any questions Vadim can answer from our listeners. ADAR's been doing private cloud since 2006, which is far ahead of anybody else you're probably going to be evaluating. If you look back at their track record, they've probably started doing private cloud in the last year or two. We've been doing it since 2006, and the important thing about ADAR is that the private cloud is all ADAR does. This isn't just one of many divisions or many product offerings. We only do private cloud. It's important for you to know that. We're partnered up with the ABA in a long-term partnership. The company is very well cash positioned, has done over 140 cloud migrations in the US and internationally, with thousands of users actively on the platform right now. And we're based in Chicago with 2 geographically diverse data centers. You can learn much more about those if and when it's time for you and us to have a conversation. So I'm going to turn it over to Rose for some Q&A to see if there's any questions. If any of you need to reach the ADAR team for a Q&A, or if you'd like to see a demo of a private cloud in action, or if you have some questions or would like to schedule a complimentary whiteboard session, which is an opportunity to work with one of our cloud strategists on your IT strategy. There's no cost for it. It's just a chance for us to do strategy with you. There's Jess Breyer's contact information. She'll schedule that with you. and we can go from there. Rose, back to you to see if there's any questions we can answer.